Eto, sono lavato, lo vedo.
Nice.
Soy yo, el genio italiano, y te voy a dar 3 deseos.
Due to the massive Hispanic audience of SMG4, the creators of both the channel and the company Glitch Productions decided to hire Spanish-speaking voices to make a Spanish dub of their show called Murder Drones, thanks to the new audio track YouTube tool. And so they thought, okay then, why don't we dub some SMG4 episodes into Spanish? They are way more popular than the Glitch shows, plus most Hispanic users suck at translating. Why don't we do it so a huge part of the world that doesn't speak English can understand our videos? It's not a bad idea at all, and in fact the dubs of Murder Drones and Digital Circus sound excellent. However, in SMG4 there are several issues that make this dubbing very uncomfortable for Spanish speakers to listen to. And this goes beyond the quality of this dubbing. There is a deeper problem that makes SMG4 sound weird in another language, and not in a good way. As a Spanish speaker, I want to briefly express why I think the Spanish dub of SMG4 doesn't work and how it could be fixed. As I was saying, the problem with SMG4's dubbing goes beyond its quality. It's not that the dubbing is bad per se. The translations are generally good and you can easily tell that it's dubbed by Latin American people who try to adapt their voices to the characters. Later we'll talk about which voices sound good and which don't, but in general I don't think the Spanish voice actors and actresses do a bad job. My main problem lies in the format of SMG4. The format the characters use to communicate with each other, which is completely different from the one used in other shows. What is the difference? The dialogues, obviously. The characters in SMG4 do always communicate through dialogues that appear on screen, while sound effects made with their voices sound in the background, removing the need of voice acting for these characters. It was like this in the first SMG4 episode ever back in 2011, and it remains like that to this day. It is the quintessential SMG4 format. The only changes over time were new types of sound effects and different text fonts, although to this day they use the same text fonts since the year... No, you know what? The first user or users who tell me which was the episode in which this font you see on screen was set as the default one, that is, in which SMG4 video this font was replaced with this font, which if I'm not mistaken is the same one they use today, the first users to answer this correctly in the pinned comment will be mentioned in my next video. I recommend you to check my playlist of each SMG4 year to find it out. Be careful, I'm not talking about the first episode in which the modern font appeared, but from which episode on it started to be used as the default one with the old font being abandoned forever. Be the first person to answer it. This unique format is one of the main features of SMG4, no matter when you hear this. Almost none of the characters ever needed to have full voice acting, as the dialogues take care of narrating what they're saying. I know in the recent years some of the main characters like SMG4, SMG3 or Human Meggy were added a voice acting that repeats exactly what their dialogues say, which I always found pointless since it totally takes away the purpose of the dialogues, but in general these are the main means of expression of the characters. Only a few of them, like Boopkins, Bob or Shroomy, break away from this format by having voice acting without dialogues, so these are the characters to whom it makes sense to give a dubbed voice in Spanish, but most of them are not like that. The Glitch Productions shows use the format of the vast majority of shows and movies in the world, which is voice acting only, while SMG4 has a more unique format. And there is the mistake, in wanting to adapt the same format of dubbing of those shows to SMG4, when these two formats are not compatible. Giving Spanish voices to characters that do not have voice acting in the original language does indeed feel unnatural, because the episodes are made for the format presented in the English version. Characters like Mario, Luigi, Tari, Kaizo, etc. lose a lot of expressiveness, and many jokes that play with the sound effects they had in the original language are completely affected. Many lines said by Mario, for example, sound pretty awkward and you can tell they were dubbed forcibly.
You stupid. Eres estúpido.
And I insist, the dialogues become completely pointless, not only because they're in English, but also because you can already perfectly hear what the characters are saying. This also happens in the original language with the characters to whom a full voice acting was added despite already having dialogues. It is redundant to listen to the exact same thing you can read. In Spanish, however, there is one character that is an exception to the rule, and that's Psycho, the only one of the main cast that was not dubbed and you simply hear her voice sound effects just like in English. On the one hand, I appreciate this because as Psycho's main feature is that the sound effects of her voice are Japanese gibberish, a Spanish voice would make her lose her essence. But on the other hand, if you don't speak English, you won't be able to understand her at all. Unless you activate the subtitles, sure. But it's also very tedious having to activate them exclusively to understand her. Yes, the subtitles that must have taken a lot of time to put in only serve to understand one character and maybe one or two sound effects here and there. That's it. Now I say, isn't that the solution? Would it be way more logical if the subtitles replace the dialogues? I mean, they kinda do, but if a character doesn't have full voice acting in the original language, my question is, why bother adding one in the dub? Would it be better and easier to let the subtitles take care of translating Mario and company? Yes, their sound effects are usually English words, but that's okay because those sound effects only represent what their voices sound like. When I play Mario video games with the text translated into Spanish, do you think Mario also translates his sound effects into my language? Of course not, he still says everything in English. I think everyone agrees that they would totally screw it up if, when he reaches the finish line, instead of saying "Woohoo, Mario time!" he said "Hurra, Mario es el mejor!" or something like that. Can you imagine if they actually did that in the video games? Bienvenida! Bienvenida a Nueva Galaxia! No, cut! You're fired! And even worse would be if he didn't say anything. So as I say, the original language has jokes and puns with the sound effects of the characters that get lost in the dubbing thanks to the voice acting they forcibly add them, as well as lines that don't feel natural for the character to pronounce in Spanish.
SMG4 y SMG3 todavía están en el castillo.
That's why I think it would be much better to use only the subtitles to translate what these characters say. It would make everything way easier to digest and it would take much less effort. It feels pointless and detrimental that they make an extra effort to give a full voice acting to characters that don't have voice acting in the original language. I'm gonna make a huge parenthesis to notice that this is not 100% true, since the original language does also feature a huge problem. As I said a few minutes ago, I don't see the point in the English version in giving full voice acting to characters like SMG4, SMG3 or Human Maggie, because they already have dialogues. But something I noticed is that sometimes they also give a voice to Mario or Luigi, but not with voice actors. Instead, they use a weird program that distorts their voices to say some of the lines and it just sounds terrible.
Welcome to Mario Paint. Today we're gonna paint a happy little house. First, you start off with a square. That's all. It's done.
They don't do this every single time these characters speak, luckily, only on random occasions, but when they do, I understand that in the dubbing they have no choice but to give Mario voice acting, so I can't put all the blame on the dubbing. I'm not sure if they still do this in the original language or not, but don't do that, guys, it sounds cringe. Please don't do it. I think in the dubbing that could be fixed by adding Mario's sound effects themselves and then subtitling them, but better if they don't distort from the original language, thank you very much. Well, that's all I have to say about the difference between formats. Let's see what I think about the voices themselves. One of the things I like most about the dubbing are the expressions and idioms from different countries that are used depending on the voice actor or actress. There are some very specific lines from different Spanish-speaking countries that, if you don't know, can shock you to hear them, but rarely do them sound forced. I was surprised to know that the one who dubs Luke's character is from my own country, especially because he doesn't sound Argentinian at all, and I think he does a great job imitating neutral Spanish. I prefer SMG3's voice acting, however. He's the character who plays the most with idioms and terms that you probably won't know if you don't come from the same nation, but that you can guess by the context. And he's the one who most changes the sentences of the original language to make a good joke or simply to make it sound better.
What the hell is this?
Another two standouts for me are Swag and Chris, who have this particular unique accent from Spain that represents very well their original voices, which are the base of their comedy.
Tenemos más que bolas de acero ahora. Tenemos bolas de titanio, carajo.
But I think the delivery I like the most out of the main crew is Fishy Boopkins' voice. It is undoubtedly the one that tries the hardest to imitate the voice Kevin gives him in the original language, and surely the most effective one, hardly ever feeling forced.
Me llevé las latas de frijoles de casa y metí mi fideo dentro, pero no llegaron las vinitas.
These are the voices I like the most in the dub, along with those of many occasional characters and background jokes every now and then. The others are not very good. I hold up that the dub still has some very good stuff, like the translation and how they adapt the jokes and dialogues into Spanish, constantly modifying sound effects and adding idioms and all that. The voices are only a portion of the total, but yeah, many of the voices really sound off in my opinion. Mario's voice isn't terrible, but he has the already mentioned problem of going from gibberish sound effects in the original language to a full voice acting of everything his dialogue says here. In this case, the voice actor does not have a voice model to imitate, so he does a super forced, stereotypical Italian accented voice that usually feels out of place.
Mario quiere ser un rockstar. Oye, Luigi puede ser patético, pero también es estúpido. ¡No! ¡Mira! ¿No quieres jugar con la cabeza de Mario? ¿Hola?
I really don't believe Mario would express himself like that based on what he's doing. The exact same thing happens with Luigi. At least half the times he speaks it feels unnatural, which does not happen in the original audio. Kaizo has the same problem, but in this case it's not that his voice feels forced or out of place, but rather because he's Psycho's counterpart and shares all the scenes and dialogues with her, it really clashes with the fact that Psycho speaks Japanese while he is speaking Spanish. It just doesn't make sense. And I'm not saying they have to change Psycho. In fact, I think that is the way these characters I just mentioned should go, including Tari. Although her voice in Spanish sure is irritating.
No hay que ser violentos si tenemos el poder de la amistad.
No offense to the person who dubs her, but I feel like Tari's personality is being a young girl, who is clearly not an infant, but occasionally acts like one because she's shy and extremely friendly. She's not like Boopkins, who is literally a child. She's a young girl with a somewhat childish personality, and her English delivery feels exactly like that. Here, she literally sounds like a 5-year-old, like a character from a show for infants, and Tari is not that.
¡Yay! ¡Woohoo! Este es Austin, mi patito nuevo, puede cantar.
I think that's why her voice doesn't work. I don't tolerate human Maggie's voice either, but the same thing happens in English, so I guess the imitation is brilliant. Then some background characters have weird deliveries that are not my cup of tea, but for me the one with arguably the most disappointing bob of them all is voice. But for me, the one with the most disappointing voice of them all is Bob.
I didn't gamble your house. I gambled the hotel, which just so happens to have your house in it.
Pero yo no aposté tu casa. Yo lo que aposté fue el hotel, el cual inconvenientemente tiene tu casa en él.
The concept of Bob's voice was actually understood. It's an inexpressive, kinda robotic voice made by a program that gives him a delightful comedic touch. But here it sounds so bland and energyless that I don't feel anything when I listen to him. I don't know if the voice is made with the Loquendo program or what, but I think they should use the more classic Loquendo. I think it would be so much funnier, as it would really sound like a voice with a snitch of energy.
Si dijera lo que pienso ahora mismo, a SMG4 le cerrarían el canal XDDD.
Yeah, overall I feel that most voices could be improved, while some of them are pretty good and you can see the effort to imitate their original voice actors or actresses. My last big problem with the dubbing of SMG4 is the continuity with the channel. To this date, less than 50 episodes have been dubbed into Spanish. 5 from 2022, many from 2023, a few from 2024, and 0 from 2021 and before. And there are not specific episodes that were selected for having some sort of connection or something. I don't know if they picked them randomly or what, but there's no apparent explanation as to why they chose those particular episodes to dub. In fact, some of them are linked to some arc or short story from the channel, so a Spanish speaker who doesn't speak English will not be able to understand the context of an episode since there is no dubbing for the subplot it is linked to. For instance here, when they mention SMG0 and the meme energy, absolutely nothing involving the cosmology saga has been dubbed, so imagine a Spanish speaker who just met SMG4 watching this scene. They will obviously not understand what the characters are talking about. If I don't speak English and I see a random dubbed episode in which Mr. Puzzles appears, I'm not going to understand who he is with no context, and I'm never going to if the other episodes in which he appeared are not dubbed. So why would I be interested in a show in which I don't know the context of the main characters or basically anything else? You probably didn't know this, but the channel's name here is now translated SMG4 Español, so we Spanish speakers know that it's also in Spanish, when not even a 15th part of the videos are dubbed. Why do they decide that Hispanics should see the channel title like that, when only a tiny fraction of random modern episodes are dubbed? In my English dubs, I use different YouTube tools to call English speakers' attention, especially when I don't have access to the audio track tool since I'm a very small channel. But I ain't calling my channel Villa Nostalgia English if I have only dubbed like 10 videos and the rest are only in Spanish. Obviously, I'm not saying they have to dub every single SMG4 episode into Spanish, that would be pretty much impossible. But translating the channel's title like that when it barely has videos in that language is a mistake. The dubbing feels more like an experiment rather than a useful tool for people of another language to understand the episodes, and I see that's not the intention. So to summarize, the dubbing in SMG4 doesn't work mainly because they try to adapt the way they dub English productions shows to one with a different format of character communication. This makes most of the audio feel very uncomfortable to listen to, in spite of how good the translation is and the idioms from different countries that are always appreciated, because the format of those shows does not match with SMG4's. It's an adaptation that occasionally sounds good.
Oh, this ain't so bad.
A ver, igual con una bolsa en la cabeza.
And many times just doesn't.
Why are you gay?
¿Por qué eres gay?
What I would personally suggest to improve it is mainly to put more focus on subtitling the episodes than dubbing them. Try to subtitle as many episodes as possible. In fact, many of the videos already had Spanish subtitles long before the dubbing existed, so you can take advantage of this to revisit the episodes and add Spanish subtitles to those that are not subtitled yet. And once they're subtitled, then you may add a dubbing to them. But not random episodes. It is better to dub them in groups of episodes that have some sort of relation, like the episodes of 2023, or all the episodes that come from an arc, so that your Hispanic audience has a selection of episodes they can watch with context. That way, the name SMG4 Español would make much more sense. As for the voices, I would simply recommend not dubbing characters that don't have full voice acting in English. I think for Mario, Tari, Luigi, etc. they should do the same thing they do with Psycho to make it work and not feel forced. Just let the subtitles do their work. It's that simple. I'm not requesting you to do anything else. Actually, I think less effort would make it work better. Only keep the voice acting on those characters who are voiced in the original language, even if they have dialogues additionally. As for those characters, their Spanish voices are pretty good overall.
Simplemente usen Loquendo para la voz de bot, quedaría espectacular.
I believe these simple changes would make the dubbing a much more enjoyable, funny and easy to understand experience for the Spanish-speaking audience, since it would fit better with the format this channel portrays. In fact, despite all these problems, the dubbing genuinely made me laugh several times due to some very good decisions that are frequently made, such as idioms or Hispanic sound effects that occasionally replace the original audio very well.
It's going to be different. Okay, bye!
¡Chaito!
I think this dubbing has a lot of potential, you just need to adapt it to SMG4 and it may work wonders. Lastly, remember that if you want me to mention you in my next video, you have to answer in the comment section the trivia I made at some point of this video. The sooner you answer correctly, the more chances you have to be mentioned. Thank you so much for watching this video. Leave your opinion about this dubbing and the voices in the comments. Even if you don't know Spanish, you can hear how some of the voices sound like. Feel free to criticize my English dubbings as well so I can improve. Good night and see you in the next Villa Nostalgia video, in which I hope Bob gets a Loquendo voice.